Okay, how are we looking in terms of the screen sharing, Amber?
Good, good.
Excellent, excellent. Well, it is just a pleasure to have the opportunity to come before you all today and just share some insights, things that I have discovered, things that I have learned as it relates to toxic workplace cultures and sort of some of the best practices that we can use to try and help us move the needle forward as it relates to that. As Amber mentioned, my name is Dr. Deb Hazard. I am actually an associate dean and professor at the Darla Moore School of Business, University of South Carolina, but I also have my own diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting and training firm called To Higher Heights. And so I just wanted to introduce myself with that and tell you that I really do appreciate the time and effort that you all are investing to sit in on today's webinar. And it's an honor to share space. So with that being said, what I'd like to ask us to do is this initial welcome activity. And if you all don't mind going to menti.com and using the code 1828 and then 891, that'll give us the opportunity, to get some information and sort of get an understanding of who's in the room. So I know, Amber, you had talked a little bit about them dropping that information in the chat. What you should see once you go to menti.com and put the code in is a prompt that is asking you to just share a little bit about yourself. Your name as it appears on LinkedIn. Particularly, I ask that because I'd like the opportunity to connect as possible information about your role in organization. So when you log into menti.com and use this code, you should have a bit more information there. And as you all begin to share that information, we should see it here on the screen. Fingers crossed if this technology is working well for us. So if not, do know that we're going to adapt, improvise, and overcome. So excellent. Thank you all so much for the answers thus far. But do continue to share if you don't mind, because that gives us some insights about who's in the room and what you do, your areas of responsibility. And we learn during these sessions, not just from hearing what the presenters say, but also from engaging with each other and subsequent engagement. So thank you all so much. And as that continues to come in, it looks like we have a really good cross-section of folks, diverse group of people that are going to be here in the call or on the session today. So I truly do appreciate that. So these are starting to come in. And I'll leave this here just for about another minute or so. I'm not trying to linger here on this, but I do think it's important to sort of recognize who's in the room, who's sharing with us today. So I'm going to give you all an opportunity to do that because I think it is important. And thank you for engaging this way. As a matter of fact, I do try to commit to having sessions that are interactive and engaging. And so this is an attempt to do that. And I appreciate the time. So with that, I know we probably still have some people that are putting their information in. Please continue to do so. If you have run out of time a little bit or you're not feeling comfortable putting it in this way, do please feel free to share in the chat as Amber has mentioned. But I think it's just a really good idea for us to do this. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and move to our next slide. And so with that, I wanted to just start out a little bit and share what my objectives for today's session would be, because I think it's important to just sort of set the stage so you have an idea about what we're going to talk about and you have some expectations of what you'll glean from today's session. So at the one of the most important things we want to do from the start is to make sure that when you leave this session, you have a clear definition of what workplace toxicity is, not just in terms of what others are saying, but from your perspective, what you think workplace toxicity is. That you are very readily able to identify what some of those characteristics are. How do people experience those toxic workplaces? And then really being clear as to how toxic workplace cultures impact our organizations. So not just the organization as a whole in terms of productivity and engagement, but how it impacts our individual talent that engages in those organizations. There truly is a cost, a financial cost from their legal costs, their HR costs, their costs, damaged brand. When you have a brand in your org that becomes synonymous with toxic workplace cultures, it's not good. And then we want to talk a little bit about best practices for culture change. And one of the things I want to do is to introduce a tool to you that is really emerging as a very useful tool for being able to bring about culture change. So these are our session objectives. The next thing that I want to do, again, just trying to make sure this is interactive and people really have an opportunity to engage with us during the session, is to ask you to indicate your level of familiarity with toxic workplace cultures. So I put a couple little options in here for you, and I'm going to go ahead and enable this so that you can begin to give feedback. But go on in, if you will, using, again, this login, menti.com, and the code that you see here. And just give us some idea about what your familiarity is with the level of workplace toxicity. And I think it's important here because this is sort of level setting, right? It's helping us to understand where people are, what their experiences have been, what their understanding is as it relates to toxic workplace culture. And I want to thank you all in advance for engaging this way, because this is really important. Not only to know who's in the room, but what your level of experience is. And I'll try to take that into account when sharing the information here today. So I know we have a number of people on. I'm going to try and make space for more people to be able to respond. So I want to thank you all for your patience in allowing me to do that. So right now, it looks like we have a number of people that have either foundational knowledge or a moderate amount of knowledge. So I guess that's sort of like, a heightened level of awareness beyond just foundational knowledge. Not quite expert, although we have a couple that have expert knowledge. So yes, this is good. And then some that, acknowledge they're not exactly sure what it is. And so this is a great place to be. In this meeting, we'll talk a little bit about it. I don't in any way profess to be an expert in this, but I'm just trying to learn. I approach all of these things from a growth mindset and just try and research and learn about experiences and share those insights as best I can. So thus far, it looks like we've had about 25 people share, and I do want to ensure that people have the ability or the opportunity to share. But again, I want to be mindful of our time as well. And so I'll maybe wait just a couple more seconds if anybody wants to share, and then we'll move on. Okay. So for the most part, kind of foundational or moderate levels of knowledge, but some that are not really sure exactly what it is and are here just to try and learn a bit more about that. So we do appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next thing that we have here. Okay, sorry about that. So just in terms of kind of making sure that everybody has a sense of what workplace toxicity is, it's something that you can Google and you'll get a number of different responses. So I would say that there's not necessarily a prevailing definition of what workplace toxicity is. You'll see here on the left that we have some information that came from SHRM. SHRM, I think, is a phenomenal resource. I tend to really sort of seek out foundational information, or really even deeper level information from SHRM, because I find them to really be beneficial. But here, what we find from SHRM is that really workplace toxicity is characterized by an environment that people feel that they have abusive managers. They feel the environment is cutthroat. And we all know a cutthroat environment is not a comfortable environment to operate in. And it's likely impacting the organization's performance and productivity overall. People don't really feel respected in toxic workplace environments. And that's not a good place to be as well, because oftentimes there's a lack of trust. People don't feel seen. They don't feel heard. When we look to the right here, I was able to Google and found a source called Believe Perform, and they had some ideas about what workplace toxicity is. So their response to this was a bit more robust, whereas I think SHRM sort of streamlined or summarized. But with Believe Perform, they talked about the fact that people are blamed oftentimes for things that occur, that there's really not this willingness or ability to empathize with people or shift your perspective. There's certain groups of people that feel entitled. There's incivility. So people are not really engaging in a way that is respectful. There's also an indication that there tends to be micromanagement. People aren't really supported, or responsibility doesn't tend to necessarily be delegated when people are micromanaged. And just overall lack of support and unrealistic expectations. So again, as we think back to what what we were trying to do in terms of our session objectives, one of the things we wanted to do is to really make sure you have an understanding of what workplace toxicity looks like, what it can be, how other people experience those environments. Now, at this point, I want to ask you, having reviewed those things that we saw from SHRM and from Believe Perform, what is workplace toxicity in your own words? So based on your own experience. So how have you experienced toxic work environments? How have friends experienced them? What have people told you? What have you actually had to push through or go through yourself? So this is where we're trying to give you an opportunity to have a voice in the room and a voice at the table. Tell us a little bit about additional words that you would use to further describe characteristics of a toxic workplace, if you don't mind. Again, we learn from each other. So I think that's something that's really important. Oh, okay. No psychological safety. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the ones that are emerging as the one that there's most agreement on are going to be larger here, as you know, with this word cloud. So this notion of psychological safety is a really, really important one. Yeah, oppressive is coming through as well. All right. But there are a number of other words that are here that are extremely important. It speaks to morale. It speaks to a command and control kind of environment that's non-supportive. I also see no empathy here, retaliation as well, lack of trust. Okay. These are great. If you all will just kind of keep them coming. Exclusion. So that's one that's really important as well. Okay. People don't feel visible. They don't feel valued. They don't feel respected. Again, lack of trust, retaliation are emerging pretty strong there. Let's see what else. And there's so many other things, narcissism, negative energy, divisive environments. Okay. This is great. I so appreciate you all. Low morale, distrust. Okay. Discrimination. Absolutely. It does affect productivity. I see someone here said unproductive. So that's extremely important as well. So we wanted to just kind of take the time to give you an opportunity to speak to how you have experienced toxic workplace environments or what you believe they are. All of these things are so very important because your perspective is an important one. So with that, I wanted us to just kind of take some time to talk a little bit about um, a framework. And I'm going to share a framework that I have developed, but hopefully what you will see is that a number of the things that you have shared here are actually given consideration. Oh, I love it. So disrespect, turnover, all of those things are emerging as significant as well. High turnover, all of that is spot on. So you all are on point. So one of the things that I have done just in terms of trying to spend some time learning about this area and trying to develop a framework for it, I kept asking myself, how is it that I can really describe what a toxic framework or a toxic work environment, what that framework would look like? And one of the things I came up with is that a toxic workplace is just messy. Okay. And when I say messy, I have some things here that I have come up with. And I will tell you that it's a bit more challenging than it seems. I'm trying to be able to align certain words with this particular framework, but this is what I came up with. And I think if you reflect back upon what we saw from Sherm and Believe, Perform, and even what you all provided, that some of this you will see aligns. So one of the things that I think when we look at these messy workplaces, one of the things that there is mismanagement. Okay, so managers are either not managing or they're not managing effectively or they're micromanaging. So mismanagement is the M there in this framework. E is exclusionary. It's the exact opposite of being inclusive. It's exclusive, where people are not made to feel visible, valued, or respected. And that's important. There's group dynamics that make people feel otherized and things like that. And so that's something that's important. When we look at the S, the first S is about either speaking or placing blame on others. So there's a lack of personal accountability, and it's all about blaming other people for the situations and blaming other people for outcomes. With the second S, I really started to think about how silos affect or negatively impact organizations. People operate in silos. The group dynamics are such that it's very divisive. And I think the only word that I can really go back to is people feel otherized. You've got those in groups and you've got those out groups, and it negatively impacts how the organization performs, and also how individuals within organizations engage with each other. And then the why of this messy framework, literally yelling, bullying, and xenophobia. And all of those things really ring true in a lot of these toxic environments. And by xenophobia, it's truly just fear of the other. So when you fear other people and you otherize them, you create environments that are extremely toxic, where you don't operate with people within a framework of trust or authenticity or open and honest communication. So this is something that I just offer to you as something that I created, just trying to come up with something that's a little bit memorable in terms of what is, how can we characterize what toxic work environments look like. And without question, toxic work environments are messy. And so this, as well as some other things, will be on your handout that Amber sends to you after this webinar concludes. Now, I want to ask you, if you don't mind, to think about your current workplace and its culture. And then look at some of the options that I put down here, if you don't mind, and chime in, just sort of share how you would rate your current workplace culture. And I thank you for the first person being super honest. So communication is key. I'm just in the webinar to see what this is all about. I appreciate that. So others, where does your current workplace fall? Okay. I appreciate this. This is good. And hopefully the people who are joining us on the webinar can appreciate this as well, that really there's a cross section of org cultures that are represented here on the call or on the webinar. This is good. Please continue to chime in if you don't mind. I'm going to make space for you, so I'll hold off for a little bit before we move on to the next thing. This is very helpful. Well, I guess the good thing is we have a number of people that are in org cultures that are great. So that is awesome. That's an awesome way to be. They could be providing some insights and best practices about that as well. Others that are in org cultures that are toxic, and they're yet holding on. That's something that I say quite often. I'm yet holding on. So a really good cross section here. Okay, some that are actually on the job market now, hoping to avoid a repeat. And what I will say to them, those who are on the job market now, hoping to avoid a repeat, be careful and make sure that you spend a lot of time researching potential organizations, not just in terms of talking to people who are in those organizations, but looking at things like Glassdoor and places where you can find perspectives of those that have been in the organization. In addition to that, I suggest just spending a lot of time going through the website. If you go through an organization's website, you learn a lot about their culture, who's represented, who's not represented, what things do you see there, what things are missing. How do they speak to certain things, even some of the language that they use. So there are a lot of clues that can be gleaned from just looking at an organization's website when you're trying to get an idea about what their culture is. So I certainly don't want to get sidetracked on that, but I think it's just really, really important to be mindful of that. So it's good that we have a really good cross section here. Okay, so let's move on to the next thing. And this is, I just wanted to be able to provide some data to you, again, reflecting back on some research that SHRM has done about the high cost of toxic workplace culture. So when you really look at the costs associated with toxicity, there's not only financial costs, and you see these are broken down here. Some of them include legal related costs, lost productivity, issues with retaining employees or having to replace those that we can't retain, not being able to recruit top talent. I mentioned a little bit earlier that there's actually a negative impact for our organization's brand. So there are a lot of costs, financial, human resource related, costs to engagement and productivity, and so many other things. It's important for us to be aware of that and to really try and manage through creating a more inclusive environment as opposed to one that is a toxic environment. Toxicity really disrupts our organization and it impedes our ability to meet our established goals. And that's something that's really important. Most organizations are there. There are goals that have been set, things that you want to achieve. It's difficult to do that when you're in a toxic work environment because it's disruptive. So the toll of toxicity on our talent is something that's really important. And when we really reflect upon it and we think about it, our greatest asset as organizations is our talent. And I think that gets lost sometimes by organizations and sometimes, quite frankly, by upper level management. I often engage with folks that are in our Master of Human Resource program at the Moore School of Business that run that program. And as I'm talking with them and also talking with the students, one thing that I say quite frequently is that you can't take the human out of human resources. And I'll tell you that I believe COVID really showed us that and gave us an opportunity to really reflect back upon what's really important, our most valuable asset, and that is our people. So we've got to be concerned with how they experience our organizations, their perceptions of our organizations, how our policies and practices impact them is also very important. And toxicity takes a toll on our talent. higher levels of absenteeism, declines in performance and productivity, you know, lost work time. There's so many different things here that we experience in the face of toxic environments. And again, SHRM has some really good information out there that helps us really be able to delve a little bit deeper and further unpack how workplace toxicity has a negative impact on our human resources or our talent, which again are our most valuable asset as organizations. So one of the things that we've talked a little bit about what workplace toxicity is. We've talked a little bit about how that reveals itself, what it looks like in organizations, and even the cost of it. And so one of the things that I really began to think about is, what can we do to try and help shift the culture when we find ourselves engaging in organizations that have toxic workplace cultures? And, you know, one of the things that I came up with was sort of this framework for shifting those cultures. And the acronym is FIRST, FIRST. Because as I see it and I started to think about it, I was like, what do we need to do first? What's the first thing we've got to do? And I think when we look at that F, it involves feeling, okay, leading with empathy. So empathy, I think, is so very important. And one of the things that we've got to understand first when we're trying to figure out how to shift a toxic work culture is to be able to broaden our perspective and understanding how other people are experiencing that organization. Even shift our perspective and recognize that maybe the way they're experiencing is totally different than the way we're experiencing it, but it's valid nonetheless. So that willingness to feel or lead with empathy is so very important. And I will tell you that empathy is actually emerging as a critical leadership competency. And that's something that we're beginning to really unpack at the Moore School of Business, is to really understanding that empathy is one of those leadership competencies that we need to be aware of and that we need to ensure that our future leaders and managers are aware of. So that's the F. When we look at the I is about investigating, where we really want to seek to understand what is happening in our organization. And for me, what I say is that involves a commitment to actually gathering data. We've got to be willing to seek out the data, the information, insights and perspectives from people so that we have an understanding of exactly what is happening in our organizations. So that is something that's important, and we'll talk a little bit about that before we end the presentation, because I certainly want to be able to share one of those ways that we can gather that data. But seeking to understand what's happening in the org, how people are experiencing the org, how that is impacting them, but also how it's impacting the ability to achieve established goals and priorities. That's something that's really, really important. So when we look at the R is to try and figure out how to root out the causes of that toxicity. Who is it impacting? What exactly is happening? You know, are there certain times that the toxicity is more, prevalent than others? And why is it that people are really experiencing the org the way that they are? You know, I tend to say that some of this usually goes back to what I call the 4 Ps, right? Policies, practices, processes, and procedures. But most of the time, I will tell you that this toxicity sort of emerges more when it relates to policies and practices, but sometimes processes as well. But just know those 4 Ps are extremely important, because what tends to happen is that some of this toxicity, which emerges as discrimination, I saw that in the word cloud, it emerges as people feeling disrespected, feeling unseen. Many of those things go back to norms or practices in our organization. And it may be that those norms or practices are something that the majority of the group or the majority of your org feels okay with. But if it's causing other people to feel isolated, if it's causing other people to feel otherized, if it's having negative impacts on certain groups or certain identities, then certainly that's something that we need to be mindful of. And we want to take that into account. When we look at the S is about making sure that we set the intention regarding the organization's culture. And I will tell you that this is primarily top down. Leadership has to communicate and establish the org's culture, as well as the norms, and communicate what is acceptable in terms of practices. But at the same time, senior leadership establishes that, but it has to permeate throughout the entire organization. Everybody has to be committed to it. Now, for some people, that's going to be sort of organic. It will happen. They will automatically commit. For others, they're going to have to be incentivized to commit. And incentive to do so may be that they're going to be held accountable. So one of the things that I've learned a while ago, and it holds true in every situation, what gets measured gets done, and what gets rewarded gets repeated. So if we want people to buy into the org culture that we are establishing, and certain goals and values that we are establishing, then we've got to measure it. And we've got to reward when they're doing what they need to be doing. And there have to be penalties when people are not doing what they need to be doing. At the very base of what I'm trying to say is that once that intention is set in terms of the org culture, there has to be a level of accountability. People have to be held accountable. And so I think that's something that's really important. And then the T, and this may seem really, really odd to some people, but when I began to think about this whole culture of how to shift, how to make change in these areas where toxic workplace cultures exist, the T is a toxicology report. What does a toxicology report tell in most instances? It gives you an idea how bad the problem is. Where are we on a scale? What is it that we need to be doing different? And what I would suggest to you is there are a number of different things that can be key data points that can help us understand where our organization is in terms of workplace toxicity. Many people do the pulse surveys or the engagement surveys, things like that. Those can all be indicators of where our organization is, and how people experience our organizations. And there's one other data point or tool that I have begun to use, and I'm using it more and more widely these days. And it is called the Intercultural Development Inventory Assessment, often referred to as the IDI. Please know that I did not create it. I don't have any sort of, I don't have any rights to any profit that comes from it, but it is an assessment or a tool that I have found to be quite useful. And so when I have this T here about toxicology report, one of the things that I wanted to do is to spend some time, very brief amount of time, just kind of sharing with you how this IDI assessment can be used at both the organizational level and individual level to help people understand where they are in terms of interacting and engaging across difference, but it actually gives them the opportunities to really develop in those areas. At the end of the day, one of the things that causes this deep workplace toxicity that we experience is the fact that people don't effectively interact and engage across difference. And when they fail to do that, and fail to shift or broaden their own perspectives when engaging with people, that's where we find a lot of toxicity in work environments. So what I'm going to do, and I hope this technology works for us. This is a very short video, 3 minutes, as I recall, a little over 3 minutes, but it introduces you to this intercultural development inventory tool. And as I said, it's being used widely in organizations all across the globe. I'm actually, even though I live in South Carolina, I'm in Texas right now, working with a global organization that is, we're using this intercultural development inventory tool for teams within their org, trying to help them create more inclusive teams. So that being said, I'm going to start the video really quickly, and then we'll move on.
Developing intercultural competence is essential in today's world.
Yet we're not always as culturally proficient as we'd like to be.
Our ability to navigate cultural differences affects what we accomplish in our organizations and what our students learn in our schools. How would you assess the intercultural competence of your group or workplace? The Intercultural Development Inventory, or IDI, eliminates the guesswork by identifying the cultural proficiency of not only your group or organization as a whole, but also your leaders and employees. The IDI is the leading tool in corporations, primary and secondary schools, colleges and universities, government, and not-for-profit organizations. The IDI is available in English and many other languages and is used in over 30 countries across all continents.
The current IDI, developed by Dr. Mitchell Hammer, is a 50-item questionnaire. It measures 5 core mindsets and behaviors toward cultural difference that make a difference in how we work, educate, and provide leadership to others. Movement along this continuum towards acceptance and adaptation enhances more culturally responsive teaching for educators, results in managers being more effective mentors and leaders across diverse groups, increases contributions from diverse resources that increase a team's performance, and creates a more diverse and inclusive workplace for an organization or educational institution.
The IDI is used for individual coaching, counseling, and leadership development and is widely selected for baseline assessments, including needs analysis as well as program evaluation. The IDI has been extensively tested and has high cross-cultural validity and reliability both domestically and internationally. Further, it is not culturally biased and has strong predictability in both educational institutions and organizations.
In short, the IDI accurately measures intercultural competence with results that are meaningful, useful, and practical. This tool is available in education and organization versions with professionally prepared customized results, including individual results, group and subgroup profiles, and customized intercultural development plans that provide a blueprint for developing cultural proficiency.
For those interested in using the IDI,
Okay, so I wanted to certainly make sure that I shared that information with you all in terms of the IDI and its usage. It's so very important to understand that oftentimes when there are environments in which toxicity is prevalent, it's because people don't really, they're not committed to interacting and engaging across difference. And oftentimes they don't even have a sense of the fact that it is problematic for them. They perceive themselves to be much better able to engage across difference than what they really are. I like to say that data drives decision-making. And so most of the orgs that I work with see the IDI as a tool that can provide data to them in terms of their groups, subgroups, orgs, all of that. And they have a data point. And from that point, they have a sense of exactly what they need to do in order to be able to move the needle forward and achieve higher levels of productivity for their org. So certainly wanted to spend some time sharing that information about the Intercultural Development Inventory tool. I am what is referred to as a qualified administrator. And so with that, we're actually able to deliver the assessment, give group debriefs, individual debriefs, where people have an idea of what, where they are and what might need to be done in order to move the needle forward in terms of their engagement across difference. Because as we've said, it impacts how people experience their organization. It impacts how they engage with clients and customers externally. I truly see it as something that will enable us to engage better across the board and better achieve our goals. So with that being said, know that it's a data point, and data helps us to make more effectively more effectively make decisions. I'm sorry. So I am going to ask that if you all don't mind, please use this QR code to provide some feedback about today's session. Constructive feedback is always welcome. I know that I am still a work in progress and still evolving. And so I'm really just out here trying to be an instrument to help share information as I learn it, but also continue to learn information so that hopefully I can help make a difference in organizations and teams, et cetera. So with that, Amber, I would like to turn it back over to you, but I do respectfully ask, if you all don't mind, just take a quick second and give us some feedback here. It's only a couple questions, and it really does help us as we try to improve going forward.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Deborah. I truly enjoyed this webinar. I would like to take this moment to allow the audience to raise their hand. And if you would like to come off and ask a question, provide feedback, just raise your hand at this time and I will turn it over to you to allow you to talk. Okay.
Hopefully I didn't put everybody to sleep.
Don't say that. Let's see, I don't see any hands. Okay.
Oh, there's one. Is it Harold Lewis?
Dr. Harold, come on down.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, Amber, first of all, thank you so much for hosting this. And Dr. Dare, wonderful presentation. Thank you. Very informative and insightful. Question is, in a toxicity culture or organization, when there tend to be a high level of or a lack of psychological safety, what would be a recommendation on how to approach top management about, we have a problem? Because obviously they're oblivious to it, and there are persons that may gravitate towards a mid-level manager, and they're afraid if something comes up and out, they may be targeted for losing their job. So how do we approach letting the top management know, hey, we have a problem here that we need to assess, and what are some resolutions?
So I love that. I think that's a great question. And thanks for your kind words about the session. One of the first things that comes to mind is what I have learned to do working at a business school. I try not to make the moral or ethical case for things like diversity and inclusion and all of that, but I try and make the business case. And by business case, I don't mean what some people think, which is that you make more money when you have a diverse and inclusive environment. That's not what I mean by business case. Business case for me is speaking to management in language that resonates with management. So instead of maybe immediately focusing on how individuals are experiencing the organization, maybe immediately focusing on how productivity, how financial outcomes, in terms of revenues, how those things are being negatively impacted by the organization, by how people are experiencing the organization. So it's not just this is what people are saying, but here is what our numbers are looking like. Usually, Harold, if you go and you look at trend information, so let's say this is an organization that wasn't always toxic, but they're starting to sort of eke up, then one of the things that you can do is look at some data over a multi-year period and begin to actually see patterns that are emerging in that data. What are we seeing? Are there declines in revenues? Are there increases in customer complaints, things like that? So the data usually gives us some really keen insights about what's going on in the organization. And when you look at it over multiple years, some of that will start to emerge. So the most important thing I think would be to frame the challenge in terms of what makes a difference to upper management. I feel like I'm butchering that response, but if they're focused on return on investment, if they're focused on, just overall revenues and productivity and hitting certain benchmarks, being able to help them understand how what is currently going on in the organization is negatively impacting or impeding the org's ability to do so, and helping them understand how getting this thing right, how correcting it, how fixing it could help them outperform and outpace the levels that they're currently at. Does that help a little bit?
Oh yeah, by all means, thank you.
Mhm.
It gives a template on how to approach it. And I love approaching it from the business case or how it's affecting the organization. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the question.
We have another question. How would we approach a leader? I do not know that word. That has practices, that has
Put
practice.
it in the chat. Okay, let me see.
Yeah, look, see if you can. I've never seen that word before. My apologies.
Oh gosh, I can't see all of
It's
it.
xenophobic.
Oh, okay.
How will we approach a leader that has xenophobic practices and practices an affirmative action mindset, but believes it is in the spirit of DE&I?
So let me just sort of ask for a little bit of clarity. So this particular manager, so xenophobia is characterized by engaging with others, like a fear of others, right? So they're engaging with certain groups of people. They have a fear of them. They don't really want to deal with them. They've otherized them. But this particular manager thinks that they are doing so to try and help improve or positively impact things from an affirmative action perspective. Am I getting that right?
So I think what they're saying is the approach, they practice xenophobia and affirmative action. They have that affirmative action mindset. Like, so you're here just because you're Black or just because you're, a woman, but they believe that this is true DE&I. That's what they're saying. How would you approach that leader?
So I think one of the first things I would suggest, and I'm not just saying this person needs to become more self-aware, and figuring out a way to help them become more self-aware. In a lot of the organizations that we engage with, we use the IDI as that data point, because again, they can look at it from an individual or team level, but each individual also gets their assessment of where they fall. And so sometimes folks who haven't even been willing to believe that there is a need for them to sort of rethink how they engage with people or how they interact with people, when we put that data point in front of them, especially if they're ones that have more of the quantitative kind of mindset, where it's like, don't tell me about the warm and fuzzy. I need to see the data. What does the data say? A lot of times with that data point, people are willing to consider then that there may be a need for them to do something differently. I guess one thing too that's a little bit concerning about the way that example was given is that there are some people who sort of mix affirmative action and law with diversity and inclusion, and that can be very problematic. And there are people that are across a number of different identities that do that. So diversity and inclusion in and of itself is about having a multi-stakeholder perspective. So understanding whether we are talking about internal stakeholders within our orgs or external stakeholders outside of our orgs who may be clients, they may be distributors, they may be, whether we're doing B2B or B2C or whatever, these are stakeholders. And so in order to more effectively serve our stakeholder base, we have to better understand those stakeholders and their perspectives. So when we adopt a multi-stakeholder perspective, we're able to do that. So I think some of it that's problematic in what was said is that people are looking at it from like this legal sort of, you've got to do this or you're going to get in trouble. And they're going to lose out if they continue to approach it that way. This is about understanding that we have multiple different stakeholders, and in order to more effectively meet their needs, we've got to be more self-aware as individuals and as organizations about how we engage them, how we interact with them, how we seek to develop products for those particular demographics, deliver services to those demographics. So I would say, and this is my long answer to a very short question, is that I think that there has to be some sort of data like the IDI or some other tool that gives them a sense of where they are as an individual, not because people in their org are saying this, but this is something that is validated, something that is reliable, something that is tested. And sometimes that's a starting point. Some of the ones that individuals that we've had the most challenge reaching and helping them understand that there's room for improvement. The one thing that has enabled us to do that has been using the IDI tool.
We have
That was
a question.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Amber.
We have another question.
Okay.
Yes, hi, thank you. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Deborah, thank you. That was very interesting. I'm really enjoying the conversation and the questions from others, but I don't know how best to ask this. I don't know how their companies are dealing with this, but currently there's a lot of issues, a lot of controversy behind DEI. It's like every day we hear it in the news. So with all of that we're hearing, how do you keep employees, because I'm starting to see where some employees are starting maybe to think negative of it or not as accepting as maybe they were in the past, so maybe some are becoming deflated from it. How best would it be to, like, I've got to do a presentation soon, and it's something that I think I would like to bring up. I just don't know how best to address something like that, with all that, so many people being divided with DE&I.
Well, Ruby, I certainly appreciate that question, and that is something that's truly important. So there are a couple things that kind of come to mind. At the university, not only have I launched like our first diversity and inclusion course in our business school ever, but I also teach in the area of corporate social responsibility and sustainability, because there are things that I'm passionate about, but I'm beginning to see more and more alignment between them. So here's what I would say, Ruby. If you know that certain people are going to have a visceral reaction the minute you use diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm not saying to hide those words, and I know some people are gonna probably glean that from what I'm saying, but sometimes there are ways to accomplish what it is that you want to accomplish without framing it a certain way, such as being diversity and inclusion. One of the ways is by talking about the multi-stakeholder approach. It's one of the reasons that I began to use that terminology, because I found that people were more receptive to that. I was still embedding all of the content, all of the insights, things that relate to diversity and inclusion and the need to do so. But I framed it as having a multi-stakeholder perspective. The other thing that is becoming more and more, I guess, well received is this notion of corporate social responsibility. Because again, when we talk about corporations and having a responsibility to effectively serve their communities, that really is about, again, that multi-stakeholder approach. I would say when we look at how corporate social responsibility is sort of evolving into this measurement focus on environmental, social, and governance, right? So ESG. When we look at environmental measures and accountability, social, which is the communities we serve, D&I falls under that. And certainly can be spoken to in that area without necessarily using the words diversity and inclusion. And then there's the governance piece, where we actually look at the organization, and even, when you think about governance, what we're trying to do really permeates from our boards to C-suite and beyond. So I think there are some frameworks that can be used to deliver what we're trying to get people to understand without necessarily having to continue to use those words, diversity and inclusion. And what I would say to you is, what I offer up is that if you look at multi-stakeholder approach, if you look at just more generally like stakeholder engagement, if you look at corporate social responsibility and also environmental, social, and governance frameworks, or ESG, those are ways to be able to get people to understand and maybe more easily buy into some of what we're saying without necessarily using the words diversity and inclusion. Now, with that, I will say that I know that that will be perceived as being somewhat controversial by some people, but I am in a business school. And for me, it is about trying to figure out how to align the message with the value proposition of the people that I am engaging with. So I would offer that up, Ruby.
Thank you so much. That was great.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question.
We have one more question. Hold on real quick. Okay. Someone asked, where could they find the high cost of a toxic workplace culture from the SHRM report?
Well, that is excellent, because it will be in the handout that Amber is going to provide to you. I made sure that I put that in there, as well as some of the other frameworks. And there's another resource from SHRM as well. Again, they're one of my go-tos in terms of really getting data and information to help support. I will ask, and I'm going to go ahead and move to this. I would absolutely love to be able to connect with those that are on here. There are a couple different ways that we can do it. You know, my personal LinkedIn profile, but certainly my company is on LinkedIn as well. We're trying to boost our presence there. I'll be posting information about different sessions and things like that that the org will be doing, to higher heights, that is. I've got some trainings coming up, so I really would love to connect. And if you all would message me, I certainly have a willingness for persons who've been in this session or whatever to give some sort of discounts on training that is coming forward. So this is information about To Higher Heights. I'd absolutely love to connect, even on LinkedIn, and I'd love to be able to continue to engage with you all going forward.
Hold on, I'm trying to put your, yeah, there's the better one. Let me delete this long one. Okay, there, I put your LinkedIn.
So just FYI, that very first one is my company's website. And then the second is our actual company LinkedIn page. Just starting to build that up. And I've got some people helping me with brand presence and all of that. So would love to be able to have you follow there. And you'll get a lot of information from that particular site if you follow that, because it'll tell you about upcoming trainings and engagements and things like that. But I would be remiss if I did not give a huge thank you to Society for Diversity and IDC for giving me the opportunity to share insights today. Working directly with Amber has been awesome, because she's been so helpful in this process and helping me keep the nerves down. So I just want to say thank you to IDC and Society Diversity for this opportunity. I am grateful.
We definitely appreciate you, Dr. Deborah, and we look forward to working with you in the future. As always, if anyone needs HRCI or SHRM code approval or continuing educational credit certificate, please reach out to me via email. I will send out a follow-up email once I receive the handout from Dr. Deborah and her contact information. If you have any other questions or concerns, feel free to direct them to me. If you have any questions for Dr. Deborah, please direct them to her. As always, everybody stay safe, have a great weekend, and see you all soon.
Thank you so much.